It has been almost 7 long years since the last release from Cunha Simulazioni, the producers of Assetto Corsa and Assetto Corsa Competizione. Today we'll have a closer look at the early access of the new Assetto Corsa EVO. Could be EVO, but it's Italian, so it's EVO. While early access still has some bugs and probably not the best experience, there are many positive things that need to be said in this early review. In the last couple of years, the gaming world has definitely changed. We've seen the rise of AI and the latest GPUs with unimaginable performance in 2018 when ACC was launched. While this is a positive change, the expectations of the community have changed as well. Every new title has big expectations, and if the title cannot match the community's requirements, it simply becomes lost in the sim racing world. One of the most recent examples is Rensport, which promised to deliver unmatched performance and racing experience, but it suddenly disappeared and no one is even talking about it anymore, let alone play it. On the other hand, iRacing has been able to keep its user base for the last 10 to 15 years, while the graphics remained, let's just call it, not up to date. But the experience doesn't only come from graphics and how the game looks, but also how it feels and what features it offers at what price. Which leads us to AC EVO and what it wants to become over the next few years or maybe even longer. Yeah, look at these guys. I'm just gonna stop. Let's stop and just have a look at what they do. They're really not doing much. So in this early review we will cover the negatives, but we have to understand that AC EVO, it's just an early access game with some of the bugs and a lot of features that need to be fixed. But let's actually begin with the game. The price on Steam is $32 US, which is a 20% discount for the first 2 weeks of this early access release. Everyone that buys the game now will still get the full game when it finally releases in the version 1.0. The game's releases will also be in stages. Every stage, every few weeks or even months, while they slowly introduce few bug changes and add more features into the game. The full release with all features is expected in fall 2025, while multiplayer should be released in the third early access drop, while free roam right after that. While the game should get more features over time, the structure and the physics should already be on the track of an end product. Not to even mention the graphics that, I'm gonna say, look really good in this first release. Even though some suggest that it still looks like a game from 2015, my experience, I'm gonna say it's quite the opposite. I think the game looks decent for this early release. But let's begin with the graphics and the settings I used. My PC isn't exactly the 8th wonder of the world, but still does a solid job with most gaming titles. Recommended settings from Cunha Simulazioni include the RTX 2070, 16 gigs of RAM and the Intel i5 of 10th generation, even though CPU isn't really a big deal in this whole story. My setup, however, consists of the RTX 3060 i5 of 12th generation with 32 gigs of RAM, but I still had to reduce most of the settings to mid or high to run at about, I'm gonna say, 40 to 45 frames per second. Later, I added DLSS and I had a significant improvement in performance with just about 60 frames per second in normal dry conditions with 20 cars on the track. However, the situation changes when we add rain or even when the night falls. Rain with the same settings will typically reduce the FPS by about 20 to 30%. The situation is almost the same while driving at night with around the same drop in FPS. I should point out that even while optimized for version 1.0, the game should be good to run on the RTX 30 series, while 40 or maybe even 50 series should be a go-to option just to get the most out of the game. But that's not bad, since Nvidia released their 5070 at a price of $549 US, and it should outperform the 4070 by a long shot. I know, kind of fake frames, but I really don't mind. Also, 4070 outperforms my 3060 by quite a lot, so I'm guessing that 5070 should be able to run everything on ultra settings with about 120 or even maybe more frames per second. Which will put us to a total cost of the PC about 13 to 1400 euros, give or take, to run this game at ultra, considering that the price of the 5070 will be around 700 euros in Europe, and of course considering that we need to, I'm gonna say, cut some budget for the other components like the CPU and RAM. While AI drivers are not the smartest, they can drive. The starting procedure doesn't exactly look right, with all of the drivers moving closer to the middle of the track instantly and then starting to take their normal racing lines. I guess a few tweaks here and there, and I think this could be fixed, so it's not a major issue. But something that stood out was definitely problems in the rain, and yes, they did a community gathering at Laguna Seca, turn 2. So I guess they really like that spot. Jokes aside, AI drivers in the rain don't really know what to do and mostly miss their braking points thinking that the track is dry. This leads us to the next problem, which is driving in a big group. When a group of AI drivers get closer, they start slowing down and creating a little train of slowly moving cars, which are hard to overtake since they're just taking most of the road. Another interesting thing is their racecraft, or I should say a lack of. I've seen many crashes and missed braking points, which should make me believe that these AI machines are programmed to make occasional mistakes. But I guess they're just making too many mistakes at this point. Still, something that I think will be fixed in the future, and of course, when we get the first release, I think all of this should be polished. But what is really positive is the speed of these AI machines. Once they are in clean air, they really start showing their skills and eventually get up to pace. I have to mention that I used 100% AI, but every time I got into the race it showed 97, which I believe to be another bug in the system. This 97% AI wasn't too difficult to beat, but I really had to focus not to miss my braking point or make a mistake, because AI will definitely use it. But it seems like that the AI is better with racing cars than road cars, which kinda leads us to the next point. I believe that we need to start with the settings and the force feedback, because it will determine how the car feels and performs and how well we can feel the differences in grip and weight transfer on the cars later on. I used the recommended settings but only reduced the NDP and increased an FR on my wheel. And yes, I'm using the DD Plus from FANATEC. This helped me to feel the car a bit better under braking without having a very dampened feeling of the car while turning. Another important part is what wheel you're using, and I highly recommend having a look at the recommended settings and possibly tweaking them to your personal liking. Overall, I would still say that I'm expecting some improvements over time, but I guess they will come in the next few releases. One of the most important parts is the in-game settings, which I believe should be explained in the menus without having to guess what each setting does. But assuming that everyone will do this part maybe once in a while, it's not a huge downside. And of course, these are my settings if you wish to try them. After setting the wheel, I finally started to feel the cars the way they should be felt. And yes, it is good. It's actually pretty good. If you ever played ACC, there was always this weird and unresponsive feeling when the wheel was centered. And then when the car started to turn, there was kind of a big increase of FFB and overall force, which is because the amount of grip of the tires needed to become responsive was much higher. I have a feeling that this is significantly reduced in AC EVO and makes the cars not that difficult to drive, and they shouldn't be difficult to drive. Some cars felt more natural to drive than others, but I think at this point this is normal. So if you're wondering how it feels, I would say kind of a mix in between ACC and iRacing. Hard to say exactly without actually trying it, but road cars feel much more natural and almost like stepping into a real car and going for a casual drive. The fact that Cunha's developed a completely new engine, and that engine is supposed to reduce that bouncy feeling that was present in ACC when the suspension was set to too stiff, given me kind of a positive feeling that they can pretty much adjust anything before the full release. On the other hand, I really struggled with racing cars that produce this annoying sound while turning the wheel more than 45 degrees. Even at low speeds, it feels like there is a significant point where the cars start losing grip instead of being linear as the wheel is turned more. So I have a feeling that the tires forgive less and it's harder to recover the car in these difficult conditions when you're just trying to get on the edge of grip. For me, this was a big issue, and the understeer that it created made the whole racing experience not that enjoyable. I assume that the problem are slick tires that don't exactly work in the same way as sport tires in road cars. But again, if they made the road cars feel this good, I really don't see the reason why racing cars shouldn't be the same. One interesting thing is oversteer that feels manageable, especially with the Porsche 992 coming out of the slow turns. I have to say it felt incredibly smooth. while understeer seems to be kind of stepping it at these random points, which of course doesn't help with the experience, but I guess this will be fixed in the next couple of updates. Braking is another big segment that we need to address. While with most road cars, going on 100% of braking won't do too much. I definitely had to be careful with how much braking pressure was applied with faster racing cars, unless I wanted to understeer into the corner. And yes, it's possible to fully lock the front wheels if you're not using ABS or if you're not using TCS under acceleration. Yes, if you destroy your tires, if you lock them up, they will be bouncy and you will feel a lot of vibrations in the next couple of minutes or even until the end of your stint. This also depends on the ABS settings, but I assume we will have the answer to what is really the fastest way to brake in the next couple of weeks after some testing. Also, acceleration depends on the car, and I had to be careful with how hard I press the accelerator out of the slower turns. And yes, losing the car is possible, and there should be some throttle management in tight turns. Also, one of the key elements that is required for an immersive experience is definitely sound. The sound for some cars is simply not on the level where you would expect it. It's just not right, with some of the cars just not having the sound they should. But I also think that this will be improved over time, or maybe even in the next couple of updates. Also, another important part that just didn't convince me was the UI. Some parts look good and seem to follow the same theme, like their menu, which originates from ACC and the original AC, while some parts like the fastest lap simply don't have that unique presentation that we would expect from a title like this one. But I will say this again, this is probably the easiest part to change till the first release. After all of this, it's hard to say exactly how the game will look in the next couple of months or even years, because most of the content still isn't here. But what I can say is that this title has a promising future in the years to come. We have to remember, this is only early release and should be treated as such. And once again, thank you very much for watching this video, and I really hope that you enjoyed in this video. You can also consider liking or maybe even subscribing to this channel. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.